Emancipation Proclamation. And so they would let Southerners, a lot of times, they would trade with the South, absolutely. And they would oftentimes use those Southern, they would build ships for those Southerners, okay? On number 40, how did France under Napoleon III respond to the American Civil War? They technically supported the South as well, though they never declared. Of course, we know he knows the United States is distracted. He's going to take advantage of that. He's going to invade Mexico. All right? Even though it's a violation of the Monroe Doctrine, the U.S. can't do anything about it until after the war. Number 41, what were the 3 most important battles of the Civil War and why? We're going to cover that today in class. Number 42, who was the Confederate President? Well, no, I'll go over those battles. The 3 most important battles of the Civil War are the Battle of Antietam. Alrighty. After Antietam, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. He would not issue it until he had a victory. He didn't want to seem desperate. So after Antietam, finally the Americans are able to achieve a victory over Robert E. Lee, and then Lincoln immediately issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Why is that significant? Because once the Emancipation Proclamation is passed, Britain and France really had no choice. They could not declare, they could not join with the South any longer. Now that the war is about slavery, the masses, the population, the overwhelming numbers in Britain and France oppose slavery. And so therefore, even though the government was sympathetic to the South, even though the government considered the North to be more of a rival to them, the people would simply not allow their countries to join with the slave-holding South. So, had it not been for Antietam, Lincoln doesn't issue the Emancipation Proclamation. If he doesn't issue that Emancipation Proclamation, then it's possible that Britain or France would have entered the war at some point. Okay, so that's important battle 1. Important battle 2, the turning point battle in the East is Gettysburg. After Gettysburg, Lee is defeated by the Union at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. The South can only fight a defensive war. They have no possible way of conquering the North any longer. All right, they just don't have the resources. It was their last gasp, their last attempt. From that point forward, after Gettysburg in 1863, Lee can only fight a defensive war the rest of the time. Okay, and then finally out west, we have another pivotal battle. It's the Battle of Vicksburg in Mississippi. When Vicksburg falls to the Union, the Mississippi River was completely controlled by the North. Vicksburg was the last part of the river that the South controlled. Once it falls, all of the Mississippi now belongs to the Union. That means the South, the Confederacy, is hopelessly divided in half. Okay? 42, the Confederate President is Jefferson Davis, who was the most important general for the South. Robert E. Lee, the leader of Jefferson's #1 general. All right. Remember, Lee was actually offered the head of the Union Army. He refused it. He declined it and went back home. Who was the Union general, number 43, who led the North to victory? Where did the South officially surrender? We already covered. The Union general was Ulysses S. Grant. He fought most of the war out west. Along the Mississippi River. Eventually, Lincoln called him east to Virginia and said, you need to defeat this guy, Lee. Alrighty. Describe conscription in both armies. Both armies used conscription. Conscription's a fancy word for draft. Both armies drafted soldiers into their armies. Originally, they were volunteer armies, but eventually they both went to the draft as the war dragged on. The South did a draft earlier than the North because they were so desperate for men. The most famous effect of the draft in the North were those draft riots. Remember, Irish immigrants who were now being forced to fight and forced to fight to end slavery, they thought, began to riot. It went on for weeks. Hundreds of people were killed as these Irish immigrants protested being forced to serve in the military. Okay. One other last thing with the draft. In both armies, remember, you could pay for a replacement. If you were wealthy enough, you could not have to serve, and somebody else would have to take your spot. The money didn't go to that soldier. It went to the government. All right. What was the March to the Sea, and who led it? We're going to go ahead and skip that, only because it's Ulysses S. Grant that's responsible. I'm sorry, it's William Sherman that's responsible for that. But ultimately, we're going to cover it in class today. Alrighty. Why did the North ultimately win the Civil War? I think we've kind of already covered that. The overwhelming advantages they had in terms of population, resources, industry, technology, and the fact that the South is never able to get a European nation to join with them. All right. Describe The Naval War, we already did that. That's a duplicate question that can be erased. Describe the contributions of African American soldiers. Look, they've technically fought on both sides. Almost all of them did fight for the North. You know, mostly non-combat roles. However, at the end of the war, the Northern Army began to use African American soldiers in combat. They distinguished themselves with incredible honor, valor. Some of our most decorated units were actually all black units. You should know, even the black units, they did not have black officers, leaders. They were commanded by white leaders, white officers. Alrighty. Specific effects of the Emancipation Proclamation, I kind of already covered it. Alrighty. It prevents European nations from being involved in the war. Now, for the first time ever, the war is officially to end slavery. Lincoln comes out and publicly acknowledges that's what they're fighting for. When that happens, now the North has the higher moral high ground. They're the ones that are fighting for the more honorable cause. And so most of the rest of the world begins to support them overwhelmingly. Okay? What was the Gettysburg Address? Remember, Gettysburg was the turning point battle in the East. Afterwards, Lincoln came and gave a very famous speech where he honored the service that Americans and those soldiers, you know, had sacrificed for freedom and for the nation. Alrighty. Who were Copperheads? Who was Clement Vallandigham? We'll cover that today in class. We'll do the same with number 51. We'll also cover 52 in class. 53, what was the National Banking Act? That was where we developed our banking system. We created a banking system to help stabilize the economy during the war. We gave it the authority to print greenbacks, paper money. It was a huge boost to our economy because we had not had a banking system for almost 25 years. It helped the United States economy to grow while the Southern economy was devastated by this war. What was the Morrill Tariff? The Morrill Tariff was passed to benefit the North after the Panic of 1857. It was a tariff that raised the tariff to give a boost to American industry. It had an unintended effect. It also raised extra money, and part of that money went to help fund the war. So the Morrill Tariff was partly responsible for paying for the war as well. All right. Of course, the U.S. used an income tax as well. They also issued war bonds to help fund the war effort. All right. The Morrill Land Grant, you can just cross out. That really applies to our next unit, Reconstruction. And to be honest with you, the same for number 55. All right, those are things that we're going to focus on more because their impact is more significant after the war, not before it. Folks, I'm signing off here. All right. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask tonight on Haiku or Edmodo. I will get these posted as quickly as possible.